Some quick housekeeping. If everyone could keep their microphones on mute and videos can be turned on and turned off. And I would like to introduce Robert Dietrich. He's going to be our introduction to our panelists and our moderator. Handing it over to you, Bob.
Thank you, China. My name is Bob Dietrich. I'm the Senior Associate Vice President for University Advancement at Northeastern. And it's my pleasure on behalf of President Ayoun and all of us at Northeastern to welcome you to our program today. We're delighted to have so many alumni, parents, and friends from all over the world joining us to join us in a discussion about the impact COVID-19 has had on the travel industry and tourism. And we're very pleased to have two distinguished guests join us to share their perspectives on this topic. Both are parents whose daughters have or who are currently studying at Northeastern, and both are currently leading their tourism ministries. In my role at Northeastern, I have the pleasure and the privilege of often traveling around the world on university business. And I've had the good fortune of meeting both of our panelists over the course of the last decade. And it's been really fun and a pleasure to introduce them to each other. And now it's my honor to introduce them to all of you. Joining us from Bahrain is His Excellency Zayad Al-Zayani, who has served as Minister of Industry, Commerce, and Tourism since 2014, after 25 years in the private sector, helping to successfully lead his family's business. In addition to his role as minister, His Excellency is chairman of the Bahrain Tourism and Exhibitions Authority, the Arab Tourism Organization, the SME Development Board, and Gulf Air, which is the national air carrier for the Kingdom of Bahrain. He and his wife Anud are the proud parents of daughters Reem, who received her Northeastern degree in architecture in 2018, Hala, who is currently studying psychology with us, and Shala, who will begin her journey as a Husky this fall. So as you can see, the Al-Zayanis consider Northeastern to be their family's university. We're also pleased and privileged to have Minister Sandy Uno joining us from his home in Jakarta, where he served as Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy since 2020. Following a successful career in banking, finance, and several entrepreneurial ventures, including co-founding two highly successful investment firms, Minister Uno resigned his positions in business in 2015 to enter public service and was elected Vice Governor of Jakarta in 2017. President Ayoun and I first met Minister Uno a decade ago at the Forbes CEO conference in 2015, where and he's been a steadfast and good friend of the university ever since. And he became a parent in 2015 when his daughter Anisha began her studies with us. And she graduated last year with a degree in human services and communications. And finally, our panel will be moderated by University Distinguished Professor of International Business, Ravi Ramamurti. Professor Ramamurti is also the founding director of the Damore McKim School of Business Center for Emerging Markets. Professor Ramamurti is a well-known scholar of global commerce, having published in all the leading management journals, is a fellow of the Academy of International Business, and has consulted and done research in more than 20 emerging economies. So with that, Ravi, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Let me add a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists. Let me just say a word about our topic before we plunge into the experiences of these two important countries. A lot of people don't realize, including myself until I looked up the numbers, that tourism accounts for 10% of the world's GDP, which is in the aggregate about $9 trillion, and employs about 120 million people. So we're talking about a very important sector globally. But in the context of our discussion, I think what is even more interesting, and I think we all know this from personal experience, is how this sector took the brunt of the hit from the COVID pandemic. If you look at the numbers published by the World Tourism Organization, you just see the numbers of international arrivals fall off the table, declined by 97%. between March and May of 2020. So as all countries shut down their airports and their flights, we saw this very dramatic decline in international arrivals, and it's bounced back a little bit, but it's still somewhere around 25% of where it used to be. So many countries are still dealing with the impact of this crisis. So in many ways, I think tourism and the related businesses tied to tourism represents the front end of this crisis. And unfortunately, it's going to also represent the back end of the crisis. The day tourism bounces back and attains the levels it was in 2019, that is probably when we can say the economic impact of COVID has finally passed. And people think this might take as long as 2024, or at least till 2023. So even at this moment, even as many other parts of the global economy are bouncing back, tourism continues to be a challenge. And to get into this topic from the perspective of two very interesting, and I think in many ways very different countries, as I think we all recognize that in terms of size, you kind of look for a bigger contrast between Bahrain and Indonesia, or in terms of population. Indonesia is the fourth largest country in terms of population in the world, 270 million people. So the nature of this problem is quite different. The context is quite different. But in both countries, tourism, I believe, is an important sector. So we're very fortunate to have the opportunity now to dig more deeply into this issue in the context of Bahrain and Indonesia. I'm going to turn to Bahrain first, if I may, and ask you, Your Excellency, how would you describe the role of tourism in the Bahraini economy and the impact of COVID on that? If you could just give us a very quick overview in a couple of minutes.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very privileged and honored to be joining you today in this panel. If you talk about, you had a good introduction about the importance of tourism around the world. And I think what you mentioned as numbers is the direct impact of tourism, or the direct reflection of tourism into the world's GDP, or in terms of employment creation. But you have to also take into account that that number is multiplied multifold when you take the indirect effects of tourism. How it impacts other sectors, how it exposes cultures, different cultures to each other, it encourages people to interact, and a lot of business opportunities that spring up because we travel and see new places and meet new people and discover new things. So tourism is really a gateway, not just for leisure, but, and it's obviously misconceived as such. It's also a gateway for nations to get closer together, people to get closer together, cultures to mix, and in a way, it's a learning process. Since we're addressing college students today, tourism, in a way, is a learning experience. And I'm very fascinated by the exchange programs you have in Northeastern as part of your curriculum and the co-ops, because that also opens up experience of tourism in it. In Bahrain particularly, we're a very small nation relatively, geographically, or even population-wise, we're about 1.5 million. And for us, tourism had to be from day one external tourism. So we're not a big country where we can develop domestic tourism. We had to start our tourism approach looking outwards, first to the Gulf region, the countries around the Gulf, and then expanding beyond that, India, Pakistan, Turkey, Russia, and further outwards to Africa, Europe and Asia, and eventually, hopefully, to the States and Australia. That's the way we're heading forward. In 2015, we launched an official tourism strategy at the Tourism Authority. It was built on 4 A's. Very, very quickly, the 4 A's were awareness, access, attractions, and accommodation. So these were the 4 pillars of our tourism strategy. And we set a target to double tourism in our GDP in 5 years or 4 years by the end of 2019. We managed to do that. Before COVID arrived, tourism was about 7% of our GDP. So we doubled it from about 3.5 to 7 in that 4 years. And we were headed for the next 5 years with version 2 of our strategy to make it to a double-digit territory. Unfortunately, COVID came and interrupted that. And like you rightly said, tourism is probably one of the most affected sectors in the COVID pandemic. I am also unfortunate to chair our national airline, and that is another sector that has heavily been hit by COVID pandemic. But I think we are now seeing signs of recovery. You're right in also saying that we don't expect 2019 levels before 23, 24. And we expect a lot of changes. People have changed habits in the last 18 months, 14 months. We certainly think that business travel will be impacted greatly. People will substitute that by remote meetings and Zoom or teleconferencing. Leisure travel also will change, and people will be more cautious where to go, how to go, just in case we get caught out. And people will probably plan further ahead, because you never know where you might get caught out or how you might get caught out. We are proud also that Bahrain had a unique situation that our airport never closed throughout the pandemic. We continued to fly every day of the year, although there were some days we couldn't fly because there were no airports to land in. So we were open, but we didn't have a place to go. Gulf Air is relatively a medium-sized airline, but prior to COVID, we used to have anywhere between 180 to 200 departures a day. That has dropped. The lowest we've had was 4 a week. So you can just see the scale of that. And those 4 were restricted by the countries that were open. So we went from a network of 53 destinations to only 4. That 4 being London, Paris, Frankfurt, Manila, and of course, our home base, Bahrain. We're gradually coming back now with our network. We're gradually coming back. We're seeing more people being courageous enough to travel. We're adding more frequencies to the destinations we already fly to. But we are, again, like you said, about 20-25% of where we used to be prior to COVID. I think I want to keep that, keep it limited to that for the time being. And
Thank you. Thank you. I think you raised the question of how you're responding, which I think we want to get to in just a moment after we hear from the situation in Indonesia. Then I think we want to spend some time talking about how you're dealing with this crisis. So Minister Uno, can you give us a sense of the role of tourism? We all know about some of the famous destinations in Indonesia. I've had the pleasure of going to Yogyakarta, but Bali's on my list, and I can't wait for the day when I can actually get there. So please fill us in.
Thank you, Ravi. And also I would like to say hi to Excellency Zayad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Really, it's good to be here with the exciting topics of will international tourism bounce back after COVID-19? This is probably, in our situations, 34 million people worth of questions, Ravi, because there are 34 million Indonesians having their livelihood depend on tourism and creative economy. I prepare a slide to show the magnitude of the impact on COVID-19 and our way forward. But before going into the deep dive, I would like to thank Northeastern, Bob and Bill, in particular, President Aoun, for the last 5 years. We've been really discussing about possibilities while I'm surfing in the public office to see how cooperations between Indonesia and Northeastern. I think it was really a great pleasure to have an Indonesian student addressing the Muhammad who came from North Malukus, actually address the commencements in Fenway Park. So it was his video went viral here, and it was really a proud moment for us here in Indonesia. So the numbers, which is going to be presented on the next slide, China, is staggering if you look at the 2019 number and 2020 number. So we had 16.1 million visitors in 2019, and it plunged to 4 million visitors in 2020 and almost zero this year. So from 75% plunge to almost 99% plunge. And domestic tourists basically also dropped around 30%. The foreign exchange that we earn from tourism used to be only second to oil and gas in our economy, but now we have completely collapsed to around 81% reductions. And then we lost about 3 million jobs along the way. And the good news is the creative economy portfolio that I'm also overseeing. We're still able to hold the number of jobs to about 18.7 million workers or jobs as per today. And if you talk about the three main pillars of tourism and creative economy, I took this job end of 2020. China, on the next slide, we could see that our president placed that during this pandemic that we need to fix the infrastructures of our tourism, improve our calendar of events of each destination, improve the health protocol, and making sure that post-COVID, and to answer the topic of this webinar, is that the tourism and creative economy will bounce back, will not only survive, but we would revive and thrive towards a better quality tourism and creative economy based on quality and sustainability. So we're not going to focus now like before on number of tourists coming in, but more of the length of stay and quality of their spending, as well as moving into more of ecotourism, sports tourism, as well as tourism that relates to nature and culture. We are facing, on the fifth slide, we're facing challenges, but now we have three pillars of our platform for the sectors, which is innovations, adaptations, and collaborations. This is something that we realized that got accelerated because of COVID. We need to adapt to the new normal. We innovate using big data, and we traverse and pivot to domestic tourism. And we are now having to deal with more personalized, customized, localized, and smaller in size tourism. And we need to collaborate with all the stakeholders. And to look at this in a holistic way, the slide number 6 that I would like to explain is to achieve quick win. And I think we need to battle the pandemic. So the improvement of the health protocol in each destinations would be our key focus. Preparing on a 360 level each destinations, and focusing on MICE, which is domestic MICE, wellness tourism like yoga, culinary tourism, local food, and sports tourism. Now we have triathlon, we have marathon, we have surfing, and tourism that is centers around education. We are planning to have a travel bubble for Bali. So Ravi, you've been to Yogyakarta. I'm going to be in Yogyakarta tomorrow. But we are preparing a framework to visit Bali, and this is in the next slide. That we're preparing an end-to-end from entry to the exit port, and it's going to be covered in a safe travel agreement on a G2G basis. So hopefully with this flow, we can create a safe travel corridor with an end-to-end program on a pre-departure all the way to the returning travelers. This is something that we are planning to have in July this year. But again, it is going to be subject to COVID, and not only COVID data domestically, but also of our counterparts. So we're now in discussions with few countries to actually have a trial period by June and start commencing the program by July. And the proposed flow for international tourists, which is going to be presented in the next slide, is we have activities pre-arrivals, and on arrivals, during stay, as well as departure. So this is a challenge because we know that the demand is there, but it will quickly disappear if we will not be able to convince that we have the health protocol put in place, and we have all the necessaries health facilities should something negative happen. What are the preconditions? The preconditions is on the next slide. So it has to have favorable COVID data. The president said at least 70% of Balinese must be vaccinated. And then we need to certify on an end-to-end basis the cleanliness, health, safety, and environmental sustainability of each destinations, including hotel and restaurants. And we need to have the readiness of the industry in terms of providing basically safe and comfort for incoming travelers. I would probably, because I do marathon and I love running in Boston along the Charles River, that we actually is doing kilometer probably 18 of the marathon, of the Boston Marathon. On the next slide, you will see how I show that. And then like in the kilometer 18, we slipped, and COVID actually was the cause of our slip. So our tourism was booming in 2019, and we were projected to take over oil and gas as a #1 contributor to our foreign exchange. But then we slipped. So we need a recovery strategy. We need to survive. So we are now in the process of going up that picture, and then slowly walking again, and hopefully would be running. And we need to have a short-term strategy, and the short-term strategies to recover is domestic tourism. And then how we stabilize the industries, because now everybody is facing liquidity issues. layoffs, and how do we position ourselves in the middle to long term to become destinations of choice? How we bring in environmental aspects, how we change the energy source in Bali to be all renewables, how we make Bali and other destinations like Yogyakarta all electric vehicle by 2030. So these are the type of preparations that we're doing, and hopefully the pandemic will not only present us with challenges, but also with opportunities. So maybe I stop there and turn it over to you, Ravi. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was terrific. We got a very good sense of where things are. And I take away the good news, which is that the domestic tourism is holding up much better, as you would expect, than the international tourism, which has really taken a nosedive. And also the steps you're taking are very interesting. Would be interesting to see how it works out. And I'm going to come back, if I can, after we hear from Mr. Zayani about how you think your key tourist sources, whether it's China or Malaysia or Singapore, how those countries may respond to this travel corridor you're thinking of in Bali. But before that, let's take a look again at Bahrain, because in Bahrain, as you said, you don't have the luxury of depending on domestic tourism to soften the blow. It's all has to be foreign arrivals. But a lot of it is, as you said, from the region. So in that sense, if the region becomes safe, then it becomes possible for you to get back relatively quickly, almost like a domestic tourism situation, because you have a high connection into the region. So could you tell us how you've been responding to the crisis and what measures you're taking, particularly if there are any creative solutions that you've adopted in Bahrain based on what you've seen in other countries, or simply something that you've come up with on your own?
Sure. I think one of the unique things we enjoyed in Bahrain is an early start. I remember having the first conversation about COVID with His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince Prime Minister, on the 23rd of January, 2020. It's really, for me, that was my first official interaction with the COVID before it was even classified as a pandemic. And shortly after that, there was a task force formed in government led by His Royal Highness, and we were regularly meeting twice a week just to discuss COVID issues. And we had our first meeting, formal meeting, in attendance 3 weeks before the first case was even discovered in Bahrain. That early start gave us breathing space. It gave us the opportunity to be proactive rather than reactive. And we took our decisions in a calculated manner, not under stress or duress or panic mode. The initial phase was clear that we have to secure the medical aspect because, very early in the pandemic, nobody knew how to treat COVID. Nobody knew what really caused COVID, how bad it would spread, how quick it would spread. So the initial focus was to secure medical capacity, drugs, physicians, nurses, equipment, and that we did within 3 weeks. Just to give you an idea, we doubled the hospital beds capacity in Bahrain in less than 2 months by having remote hospitals and outdoor areas or encampments. The next stage, shortly after that, was to start moving gradually from medical solutions to economic solutions, because the vision of the government was very clear that sooner or later we will end with COVID, but we will be left over with the aftermath and the economic fallout of COVID. And that we started by the end of March 2020 with the first stimulus package launched by the government. And the package was purposely front-loaded heavily. There was about 34%, equivalent to 34% of our GDP, with the main purpose to preserve job losses. The government paid 3 months' salary of all Bahrainis, whether they were in the government or private sector, 100% covered. So we wanted to make sure that, we didn't start a social problem by, increasing unemployment. Medical services were applied to everybody in Bahrain, including expatriates, absolutely free, whether it is hospitalization or treatment or testing. And we started a very, very early process of contact tracing, something that's helped us very well. And every case that was identified, it was traced, who he or she met with, where. We launched an app very early, and the app would tell you where cases were found without mentioning names. So if you were in a shopping mall, the same vicinity, the same time, you should go probably and take a test just to be careful. That helped us a lot in combating the issue at the very beginning. There was a lot of public awareness and cooperation from the public to stay committed to staying indoors. And one of the unique things we had is we never went through a lockdown throughout COVID. We're the only country in the GCC that remained completely open. Schools were voluntary on online or physical attendance. I have been to the office every day since then, excluding the days I was traveling, of course. But when I was in Bahrain, I've been in office with our staff here every day. So business has been going, and that has helped us to minimize the job loss. Fortunately, we did not have massive layoffs. Of course, some businesses suffered and some will suffer. But I think we also have to take into account that some businesses have emerged more prosperous out of this. Certainly the F&B sector, the delivery, the food sector. I mean, maybe cinemas are closed and they are suffering, but there are some sectors that came up. We have seen a huge increase in e-commerce, and it's something relatively new to this part of the world. But I think this pandemic has forced us to think out of the box and to come up with new creative initiatives. We've seen a growth in the entrepreneurship and SME sector. People are thinking of more innovative ideas, are thinking to create different solutions than the ones we have been accustomed to traditionally. And now I think we have reached a level. We started very early immunization process. We started in October last year with immunization. Today, about 60% of the population, of the total population, has received at least one shot of the immunization, and 40% have received 2 shots. Now, if you add the people who had COVID to that, that's another 12%. So we're very, very close to what they call as herd immunization.
May I ask what vaccine you're administering?
We have 4. We have Sinopharm, Pfizer, Sputnik, the Russian one, and AstraZeneca as well.
Oh, okay.
So we have a choice of 4, and it's all available for free for anybody in Bahrain. We even offered it when we had the F1 race in Bahrain. We offered it to all the F1 teams, being that the race was a season opener this year. So any members of the F1 teams, their mechanics, their press, their admin staff were given the opportunity to have free immunization here in Bahrain. I think that has put us in a level where we can say that the worst is probably behind us, not just on the medical side, also on the economical side. We are projecting a 3.8% growth in the economy this year. The first quarter has shown about a 3% growth compared to 2020, considering that January and February were quite normal months in 2020. We have also engaged in safe travel corridors. We have already signed and operational safe corridors with the UAE, Greece, Cyprus, Singapore, and Israel. And there's more being worked on as we speak. So I think, but if you ask me what was the one thing that made the difference, was that government started very early, and we were always aiming to be one step ahead of the game. It is difficult because you're dealing with something new, but we made sure that we never fell behind and had to resort to panic mode.
If I may ask you, you mentioned that the airline had to cut the number of destinations down to 4. Is it going back up now? Has it started to go back
Yes,
up?
we're back to about 20-25% of where we were in 2019. Like His Excellency experience with the Indonesian tourism, we were having a fantastic 2019, both on the airline and tourism numbers. We were up to 12.6 million tourists, which is huge for Bahrain, given that we're a population of 1.5 million. And that was a record year. Our airline was expanding. We had planned for 2020, 9 more destinations to be open, 9 on a network of 53. That's quite massive. But, you know, we got caught off guard, as the whole world did with COVID.
We all did.
Yeah.
Yes. Turning now back to Indonesia, Ms. Runa, would you comment on how the travel corridor idea, because I think that's a very interesting idea, and it may be how countries, you know, gradually, selectively open up back to international tourism. How do you think that is going to play out, and how have your main source of your tourists, which I believe are China, Singapore, Malaysia, and then a few other countries, but let's pick any of those, China, Singapore, Malaysia, are they ready to open up a corridor? What will it take for that to happen?
Well, it's definitely going to be completely dictated by the COVID data and the fact on the ground. For instance, we've been talking to India for some time, and due to the situations currently they're facing, we just need to push back on the discussions, because it's just not the right timing to even have more advanced discussions. We were discussing with Singapore, and it's quite advanced, but then Singapore moved into a lockdown this week. Also Malaysia and China. So we think that this is the travel corridor arrangement with the prerequisites, including the testing and vaccinations, would be the intermediate solutions before we were completely over this pandemic. And we need to keep on adjusting 2021 and 2022. Interesting, there is a question here in the Q&A by anonymous attendee, who's actually something that we are doing here while we're waiting for tourists to come back. We are switching some of the workforce into cleanup efforts in beaches, rivers. We're making humongous efforts to replant some of the mangrove. We are creating jobs by way of employing this just recently fired basically workers from the tourism into environmental conservation's work. And it has worked well, in particular in Bali. And when you used to go to Bali with, and the number one source of tourists for Bali is Australia, we don't have the traffic jam, which just omnipresent in Bali during 2019. And the air is much cleaner. So people appreciate that. And this is something that we continue to push And the millennials and Gen Z are big supporters of our efforts to do this more sustainability work in the sustainability area. And once tourists would come back, I certainly would want to ensure that it will be a more sustainable, more quality type of tourism that we would have, focusing on nature and culture. So we're keeping our fingers crossed, Ravi. We believe that in the long run, tourism would be a winner. But what kind of tourism? It will be a different kind of tourism. And I think this is going to be a challenge that we're going to be facing. Just one final note on that, on domestic tourism. So during the end of Ramadan festival, we normally have around 80 million people move about the countries. And we call it the homecoming, basically the greatest, one of the biggest, if not, I think it's number 2 in the world after China Lunar New Year Festival. But the end of Ramadan here, the Eid al-Fitri, celebrated by, this is the largest country with Muslim populations, but the around 80 million people would go home from Jakarta or other city centers to the village. But we banned the homecoming of the second year in a row, and only about 1 million people, actually around 1.5 million people, were able to travel early before the ban was put into effect. So naturally, all the cities, in particular the tourist destinations within the city, the theme park, the beaches, are completely flooded by the people because they have to stay in the city. So we design a policy that is more like a circuit breaker, whereby we are working with local government and the operators of this theme park and tourism destinations, that if they are seeing more than 30% of the capacity, and also if they are monitoring the lack of compliance to the health protocol, then they are required to shut down the place. They're required to close the place. And that's what happened during the end of Ramadan. And this circuit breaker concept is basically would be the one that we need to deal with under this very, very VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and a lot of ambiguities period that we're in, Ravi.
Yeah, it's very interesting how your overall numbers of domestic tourism seems to have held up much better than what you're describing in the Ramadan situation. So I assume a lot of people have been going to very proximate locations instead of going to distant domestic tourism spots. And maybe that's one way. You know, in the US, they have the term staycation. You have a vacation right where you are, go to a local hotel for a couple of days. I think even some countries where they took a flight, I think it was Australia, you could get on a plane and come and land in the same airport. Just so you had the feeling that you were at least getting on a plane and going somewhere. So I think we're all looking for creative solutions. A question by the audience, please feel free if you have any questions to post them on the Q&A, and we will have our distinguished panelists respond. If I may ask you, Your Excellency, in the case of Bahrain, I was wondering, how do you differentiate Bahrain as a tourist destination from, say, other destinations within the Middle East? And because your market, it seems to be largely regional, and there are other centers within the region that also could attract some of the same traffic. How do you differentiate? And since you have a strategic plan, you probably had given that a lot of thought.
I think one of the distinct factors about Bahrain is that we enjoy a 5,000-year history. So there's a story about the country. There's different eras that Bahrain went through. We've had different civilizations here: Portuguese, Persian, British, Indian influence, of course, Arabic predominantly. And the cosmopolitan society in Bahrain, it's definitely the only country in the GCC that has multi-faith practiced very openly. We had synagogues in Bahrain even before we signed the peace treaty with Israel. 3 years ago, I was honored to accompany Prince Charles to a Hindu temple in Bahrain that was celebrating 200 years, its 200th anniversary. And it was set originally or built originally by Indian merchants who came to Bahrain more than 200 years ago. Of course, Islam is the predominant religion. And we have an American missionary hospital and a church that's 110 years old in Bahrain. So Bahrain had an early start, and that has resonated in the culture and the way of living in Bahrain. It's very small, it's unique that you can go around very easily in it. What about the size of Singapore, area-wise? Not as dense as Singapore. We're about 30-40% of the population of Singapore. And you have the modern state today, so you have all this in between. We're 85 islands, so you have water around you everywhere. I challenge anyone to drive in Bahrain more than 10 minutes before they end up on a waterfront. So that's quite nice to see. Of course, we have a very hot summer, but for the rest of the year, I think the weather is moderate and enjoyable. And the most precious asset we have in Bahrain is the Bahraini population. They have been used to people coming from different countries around the world. They have been exposed to different cultures. And you will find that Bahrainis are very accustomed to receiving other nationalities and cultures. In fact, they go out looking for it because it's part of our DNA. We were never a closed society. We've always been open throughout the history, and that has continued within the Bahraini population generation after generation. The reason we enjoy good tourism in the Gulf is because physically or geographically, we're right in the center of the Gulf. So, we're within 1 hour flight from all the major cities in the GCC: Kuwait, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. Perfectly good logistics, even with road. Although we're an island, we have a 25-kilometer, which is about 16 miles, bridge linking us to Saudi Arabia. So it's very easy to go over by land as well. And we continue to be easy-going nation. Even when we decided to come up with a slogan for Bahrain, we thought of many things, and eventually we just chose the slogan, Bahrain, ours, yours. So, we just want to share our country with the world, and nothing too complicated, and best thing is to come and see it. We are also currently focusing on MICE tourism. We feel that is important to support our business community as well. We are currently building a $250 million exhibition and convention center, which will be the largest in the Middle East. That should be ready by second quarter next year. And we're hopeful that will put Bahrain on the global map of conventions and exhibitions, because we built it with a global scale, not even a regional scale.
That raises a question about the role of the airline, because when I think about some of the other countries, they've used the airline and the hub as a key part of the strategy for not only growing the airline, but even bringing tourists on their way, transiting through Doha or Dubai. Do you see that happening with the Gulf Air?
Not as big as the neighbors. We are growing, but we are growing in a more systematic way. We feel that, you see, if you look at their model, it's quite different. 70% of their passengers are connecting passengers. And you can only do that when you have a fleet of 250 aircrafts and you have 180 destinations. We're not there yet. And to go from 59 destinations or 53 destinations to 150, I'm glad we didn't do it in 2019, because now we would have been stuck with planes sitting on the ground. Luckily, our fall was smaller because our size was smaller. But we want to grow. We want to, the airline plays a major role. It is one of the largest employers in Bahrain. It is also a gateway to Bahrain. We're an island, we have to be linked to major cities. And this is why we're pressing on. I mean, we just launched our Singapore route a month ago. So we're opening routes. Even that Singapore went into lockdown, we decided to continue with the route because we feel it's a strategic route. We're about to launch our flight to Tel Aviv first week of June. So that's another new market for us. And we want to keep Bahrain connected to major destinations in the world.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I did notice a question that Minister Uno, you may have also seen, which is about vaccine passports. Is there any thinking of introducing or supporting such a move? You know, it's very much being debated in the US as something people feel strongly on both sides of that issue. Do you see that as part of your travel corridors and other initiatives to ease the movement of people, both domestically and internationally?
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Go ahead, Excellency. Go ahead.
Sorry, were you asking me? Or
no, I was going to ask both of you, but please go ahead.
Yeah.
Then we'll ask Sam.
Well, we see it as an option, but not the only option. So Gulf Air has been one of 20 airlines in the world which are chosen as a pilot airlines with the IATA passport. But we don't see it as a necessity for travelers to or from Bahrain. So it's one viable solution. Again, it's in the test phase, whether it will work or not, or something else will come to replace it. We never know.
But do you require everyone to be tested before they board the flight within like 3 days of the travel, or is that also not required?
Yes.
Okay.
72 hours before, except for the countries that we have corridors with now.
Yeah.
And if they are vaccinated, then they are accepted to come.
Okay. And let me just segue before we lose the thought here, because you're also chairman of the Arab Tourism Council. Can you give us a very, very quick view of what's happening in some of the other countries in the region in terms of this opening up process?
Well, the bigger countries in the Arab world, the Arab world is quite segmented in terms of tourism. You have countries that have had tourism as part of their economy for a while, like Egypt, Lebanon, and you have countries that have opened up very recently. Saudi Arabia is doing a fantastic job in opening up, and they've come up with so many touristic products in a very short span of time. They've also built an excellent infrastructure in a very, very short time, and they've trained locals to be part of that. I mean, certainly as a tourist, I'm discovering more and more of Saudi Arabia today than I had in the last 50 years. I was just in the Arab Travel Market show in Dubai 2 days ago, and Saudi had by far the largest presence and the largest stand from any of the participating 50 countries or so. Very well represented, very well packaged products, and I think they will be a big player in the Arab tourism scene. The more established countries, I mean, Lebanon has its own challenges with the economy and currency and security. Egypt is rebounding nicely. Morocco has held relatively good throughout the pandemic, although they have declined. But these countries have big geography and reasonably big local tourism volume that they can at least sustain the operation. The same with Saudi. We unfortunately didn't have that. UAE launched a very creative campaign, the best winter in the world, they called it, or I don't know how exactly it translates in English, but that's how they turned it in Arabic. It was last winter. It was quite a successful campaign. Saudi had a very good, successful campaign in the summer. You have to understand that everybody leaves in the summer here. It's so hot, so everybody goes to Europe or the States or Asia. But this summer or last summer rather, we were all forced to stay here in our countries, or at least within the region. But we found new places and we discovered new things.
Perfect. Yes, Minister Uno, sorry, if you would pick up on the vaccine passport idea or question.
I just answer it on the question and answer. There's questions on that. It's a work in progress. We're not requiring it now, but it's a discussions that is evolving. And in our travel corridor arrangement, it's currently listed as a maybe, but we understand that not everyone have access to vaccines, and I think we want to make sure that everybody has equal access to vaccine, in particular domestic, the domestic tourists, and we are now just securing the shipments of vaccines coming into Indonesia, and we're in the progress we're progressing quite rapidly on vaccinating some of the key priority tourist destinations. And if you allow me, Ravi, I want to answer Stefano here in the question and answer.
Please.
Who's asking about more on the creative economy side. The creative economy is actually done much better than obviously the tourism sector. And we have 17 subsectors in the creative economy, including applications, games, culinary, fashion, handicraft, also design. And we are just seeing now the finalizations of a merger of two big tech company here, one in mobility and one in e-commerce. And that's going to create about a $45 billion merge company. So they are not reducing employment during this time. They're actually increasing employment. So some of the workers who have been laid off in the tourist industries have moved to the creative economy, from selling food online to creating content. So COVID-19 forced us to learn new skills online and to generate income. And as a minister, I will help Indonesians maximize those opportunities and develop lasting skills for the new economy for the future. And this is a time where Indonesia should rebuild our economy back stronger with a focus more on sustainability, equality, and more modern future. We cannot use old ideas anymore. We need leaders in the business, in the government, as well as in other sectors to have more, I guess, tangible know-how, economic expertise close to the people, and can implement a much better programs. Fortunately, our president have been pretty decisive, strict, and provide a strong leadership to ensure that programs, because we have stimulus programs from grants to small loans, as well as basically food staples being distributed freely alongside vaccines. And we are making sure that these programs would reach the people who need them most. And we, fortunately, alhamdulillah, we have been able to execute the program. And we certainly hope that during the balance of this year, the next semester, the second semesters, will be a much better situations.
Thank you for fielding that question. I see that technically our time is up. And I know you both have very busy schedules, but could we maybe stay on for just a few more minutes? I want to see if there are any other questions either Bob might have. Can we go on for just a few more minutes? Okay, thank you. Terrific. Let me ask you about your experiences and what you're doing. I mean, for instance, in the case of the creative economy, I've never seen that portfolio in any other country. So I assume it's a new portfolio or designation. Is it something that came at the same time that you assumed this ministership?
It's been actually since 2011. So this is the year that we have. Oh. And I was to be honest, I was quite, I would say, pretty much in the positions of wait and see, because I was in the business sector, and I saw this creative economy is a sector that the government should step aside, should not really be involved. And they have created about 20 million jobs with the 17 subsectors. However, it actually got stronger and stronger, in particular because this ministry is providing facilitations to create better access to capital, better access to training, to reskill and upskill some of the jobs that have been displaced by technology, and actually able to attract tech company with incentives. We are able to provide incentives and an environment so that so far there are 8 unicorns or 8 or 9 unicorns that have been able to be created in the last 8 to 9 years. So I was skeptical, but then I assumed the job. So we'll just see. I've been telling my team to make sure you deregulate, you increase, probably facilitate, but less regulations would be better. Provide more access by public-private partnership, and innovations, which is not a key trait of government, should be now the DNA of this ministry. So I have a chief innovation officers, I have chief vaccine officers in my ministry. It's like, I guess, we're trying to create a campus in our ministry to be able to handle all this new economy and millennials who are now able to come up with ideas to solve everyday's problems through entrepreneurial way, being innovative, being proactive, and they're taking risks. So we're allowing them to take risks, and if they fail, we provide them with cushion so that they could actually pivot and start new entrepreneurial work.
That's a very interesting question. What is the appropriate role for the government in creative economic activity? And the answer may depend on the country and the capabilities of the government. When you look at Singapore, or you look at Korea, or you look even at China, they have been able to play a positive role in many ways to grow the sectors faster. But then for every one of those examples, you can find other examples where the opposite has happened. I want to ask both of you as a final question about your experiences coming from the private sector into the government. But before I do that, I want to see if Bob has any questions he'd like to ask. Bob, I know you've muted, but if you have a question, do jump in.
Well, I think we've covered pretty extensively the creative economy in Indonesia, but both of your titles suggest that tourism is only one part of your portfolios. So I'm wondering if you might comment briefly on, outside of tourism, outside of the creative economy, what other industries are driving, or do you consider to be the economic drivers for your countries, both currently and into the future?
Start with Your Excellency.
Well, for us, the largest sector remains oil and gas, but it's only 22% of our economy. And it's closely followed by financial services, which is about 20%, and then manufacturing, which is about 16%. So we're not, compared to the other Gulf countries, we're not predominantly oil or energy driven in terms of the composition of our economy. We're also quite unique in that 80% of our GDP is generated by the private sector. So we're not heavily reliant. And maybe that's because we don't have as much oil and gas resources as our neighbors. So our economic composition is kindly different. What we want to focus more on is more on the digital economy, on service sectors, and on the growth of SME entrepreneurship. And we want to change the mindset from being localized to being global from day one. Start your business with a global outreach, with a global, you don't have to do it from day one, but have it in your plan that your ambition is not to just serve your neighborhood or your country, but the whole world. And with today's advanced technology, you can do that really from your bedroom if you wanted to. You don't even have to have an office. So we're pushing towards that. We're seeing a lot of uptake, especially from the younger generation, starting businesses. Traditionally, Bahrain and the Gulf, traditionally, all businesses were started by family members, very close family members. So father, son, brothers, not even sisters initially. Now we see women getting more into the workforce. But now we're seeing a new generation where friends and people who not necessarily even were originally friends, as in went to school together or anything, but their interests met somewhere and they're forming partnerships. The next challenge for us in Bahrain, and this is something I hope to do with the team in the ministry, is to push companies to go from private to public. We are still lagging behind generally in this part of the world, and Bahrain more specifically, and transforming companies from being family owned or close owned from 2-3 people to accessing public markets and capital funding through public offerings like it is in the States or in Europe or Asia. I think once we get to that level, then we will be in a much better position to have global companies and to have small companies that start as very small startups but end up being giants. So that is the next milestone that we would like to achieve.
If I may add, basically Indonesia is now the part of G20, we will be hosting G20 next year. And our economy before COVID was on a trajectory to making very good progress. It's projected that by 2045 we'll be the 5th largest economy of the world. And the sectors that are dominating are SMEs with 60%, sectors manufacturing and agricultural, natural resources. We're building infrastructure on a massive scale in the past 5 years. We are also, our economy is driven by consumption because a large middle class that is newly minted and the consumption is driven the economy. It's we're now also focusing more on export. I guess in the past we rely a lot of imported products, but now we're reshaping doing structural reforms. We just passed a very actually holistic and comprehensive structural reform by we call it job creation bills that would allow I guess investment in various sectors. So and tourism, we used to be known to only Bali and Yogyakarta, but I have 5 super priority destinations behind me. So I'm doing my marketing because I didn't go to the ATM, Arab Travel Marts. I sent my deputy there, but we have Borobudur in Yogyakarta, and then we have Mandalika, which hold MotoGP next year. This is in Lombok. We have Danau Toba, the largest super volcanic lake in North Sumatra, and then North Sulawesi. We have a beautiful beach of Likupang, and also the Komodo dragon in Labuan Bajo, that's in East Nusa Tenggara. So I would like to invite Excellency Zayani and you, Ravi, as well as Bob, to visit here, and Bill, China, and we hope we would be able to be a good host when you visit.
Thank you very much. Would love to take you up on the offer and also to learn more about this whole creative economy idea. And well, I've been to a few places in the Middle East. I've not been to Bahrain, and so I look forward to the opportunity to do that. If I can ask you in just a couple of words, what has your overall experience been like coming from the private sector and working in the government? Would you recommend it to others?
How do you expect me to sum that in a couple of words? Yes, I mean, if the question is would I do it again? Yes, I would definitely do it again. You know, when I left the family business, I was at the very top of the pyramid. I was the chairman of the group. I had about 3,000 people reporting to me, and fate has it that, I mean, statistically, I was supposed to be the longest serving chairman in the family because of my age. But I only lasted for 8 months, because 8 months after I became chairman, I was asked to become minister. And people ask me why you do it. I say, well, this is my equivalent of military service. I never served my country, so this is my chance to serve my country. I realize that it is not a permanent job. One day I will go back to the private sector and to my family business. But you know, I'm very happy to be where I am. I've enjoyed the 7 years that I've been here. I'm blessed with great leadership, excellent team to work with here, and mostly the support of my family. You know, my brothers, my partners, my nephews, my son, who currently manage the business. Reem, by the way, just joined the business in February, so she's the latest family member to join the business. Of course, my wife for her endless support, and I frankly encourage everybody to give back to their country. Some do it through philanthropy, some do it through charity work. His Excellency, myself, at least we're getting paid to do it. There's a lot of hard work. It's not a walk in the park. I used to think that the minister's job is more ceremonial. It's not. There's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of scrutiny. You have to live in the public eye, dealing with parliament, dealing with the press, dealing with social media. Whatever you do, there's always somebody who's not happy about what you're doing. It just becomes part of your life, and you have to learn how to shield yourself and carry on doing what you're doing and believe in what you do.
Thank you. Mr. Ono?
This is my 5th year in public service. I ran 2 massive campaign. I lost in elections. I won in elections. I have been, God has been, and Indonesia have been very nice, very, very kind to me. I lost my job during the 1997-98 financial crisis and almost bankrupt. So I started my own investment consulting firm, financial consulting firm from zero. We were just the 3 of us, 3 partners. And after close to 20 years, we were able to create an active publicly listed investment company with portfolio of around 28 companies with 30,000 jobs created. So I've been very fortunate. I think I need to, when it's an honor to serve the country. And when you got the opportunity, I think it is really the best way to give back to your country by serving.
Thank you.
Ravi, I think we've helped. We've come to about 17 minutes beyond our allotted time. So I think unless you have something else, I think we can probably think about wrapping up and letting Minister Uno enjoy the rest of his evening.
Well, I'll just say that I've enjoyed the session immensely. It's great to get firsthand insights from people who are really in touch with what's happening as of the moment. In a nutshell, I mean, I take away that the crisis in the tourism sector is still with us. That piece of it has not yet been solved. We're in the throes of it, going through some of the toughest periods, I think, in that sector. Some countries have been able to soften the blow with safety net programs, some less so than others. But also we're seeing creative solutions coming out in every country, I think, as a result of COVID, as a result of these constraints. And hopefully that will be how we bounce forward rather than just bounce back as we get out of this. So thank you all for your distinguished speakers for your time. I hope one of your children, Your Excellency, will come to the business school. I mean, they all seem to everywhere else. Please send them to my school, the Ramamurti School of Business. That's my plug. I'm turning it back over to Bob. Thank you for pulling all this together.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our speakers and our distinguished guests. I know that their invitation is sincere. I've had the good fortune of being hosted by both Minister Uno and His Excellency, and they both represent beautiful countries. So if you ever have the opportunity, I encourage you to accept their kind invitation. So with that, I will wish our participants in North America a pleasant and productive day. To those folks in Europe and the Middle East, a nice afternoon, and to our friends and alumni and parents in Asia, a very pleasant and restful evening. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.